Here's what happened to me when I was 34 years old, working as a detective in Chicago. I thought I'd seen everything after 10 years on the force, but this case still haunts me today. And by the time I tell you what really happened that October night, you'll understand why I never look at missing person cases the same way again. It was a Tuesday evening when the call came in. Missing person report. Sarah Chen, 28 years old, marketing executive, hadn't shown up for work in 3 days. Her sister was frantic. Now in Chicago, we get dozens of missing person reports every week. Most of them resolve themselves within 48 hours. People have fights with their families, they take unexpected trips, they get caught up in new relationships. But something about this case felt different from the moment I walked into Sarah's apartment. The landlord let me in with a shaky hand. He kept muttering about how Sarah was the perfect tenant, always paid rent on time, never caused any trouble. The apartment was immaculate. I mean, everything was in its place. The bed was made with hospital corners. The dishes were washed and put away. Even the magazines on the coffee table were arranged in perfect alignment. But here's what caught my attention immediately. On the kitchen counter, there was a half-eaten sandwich. The bread was starting to curl at the edges, and there was a glass of milk next to it that had gone sour. Sarah's purse was sitting on the counter, wallet and keys inside. Her cell phone was plugged into the charger by her bed. Her car was in the parking garage downstairs. I've worked enough missing person cases to know that when someone plans to disappear, they don't leave their essentials behind. They don't leave a meal half finished. They don't leave their apartment looking like they just stepped out for 5 minutes. I interviewed her sister first. Jennifer Chen was 3 years younger than Sarah, worked as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial. She told me Sarah had been acting strange for about 2 weeks before she disappeared. Not strange in an obvious way, but little things. Sarah had always been a social butterfly, but she'd been declining invitations to go out. She'd been asking weird questions about their childhood, wanting to know details about things that happened when they were kids. Jennifer remembered one conversation specifically. Sarah had called her on a Sunday night and asked, "Do you remember when we lived on Maple Street? The house with the blue shutters." Jennifer told her of course she remembered. They'd lived there for 3 years when Sarah was in high school. But then Sarah said something that made Jennifer's blood run cold. "I've been having dreams about that house. But in my dreams, there's a basement." We never had a basement on Maple Street, did we? Jennifer confirmed they never had a basement. The house was a ranch-style home built on a concrete slab. But Sarah kept insisting she could remember going downstairs. Remember the smell of damp concrete and the sound of water dripping. I decided to take a drive to the old neighborhood. Maple Street was about 20 minutes from Sarah's current apartment in a quiet residential area that hadn't changed much in the 15 years since the Chen family moved away. I found the house with the blue shutters. The current owners were happy to let me take a look around. They confirmed what Jennifer had said. No basement. Never had been one. But when I was walking around the property, I noticed something interesting. The house next door, number 1247, had been torn down about 5 years ago. There was a new construction in its place, but I could see the old foundation was still partially visible in the backyard. I started asking around the neighborhood. An elderly woman who lived across the street, Mrs. Patterson, had been there for 40 years. She remembered the Chen family well. "Nice girl," she said, very polite. But when I mentioned the house next door, the one that had been torn down, her expression changed. "Oh, that was the Morrison place," she said, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Strange family. The father was some kind of researcher, did experiments in the basement. The mother was hardly ever seen. And their son," she shook her head, "Tommy Morrison. He was about Sarah's age, maybe a year older. Odd boy. Always watching the neighborhood kids from his bedroom window." Mrs. Patterson told me the Morrison family had moved away suddenly in the middle of the night, just packed up and left. This was about 6 months before the Chen family moved to a different neighborhood. She'd always wondered what happened to them. I ran a background check on Thomas Morrison. What I found made my spine tingle. Tommy Morrison had been arrested twice as an adult for stalking. Both cases involved young Asian women. Both cases had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was clear. I tracked down his current address. He was living in a suburb about 30 miles outside Chicago, working as a night shift security guard. I decided to pay him a visit, but not alone. I brought my partner, Detective Rodriguez, with me. Tommy Morrison was now 44 years old, living in a small apartment complex that had seen better days. When we knocked on his door, he answered immediately, like he'd been waiting for us. He was thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He invited us in without asking what we wanted. His apartment was covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, all of the same woman, all of Sarah Chen. Photos of her going to work, photos of her at the grocery store, photos of her jogging in the park. Some of these photos dated back years. "You've been watching her," I said. It wasn't a question. Tommy nodded slowly. "Since we were kids. She was so beautiful. Even at 16, she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I used to watch her from my bedroom window. She'd come home from school, and I'd watch her do her homework at the kitchen table." Rodriguez was already calling for backup while I kept Tommy talking. "Where is she, Tommy?" "She's safe," he said. "She's finally safe. She's where she belongs." "What does that mean?" Tommy's eyes got this distant look. "My father's old laboratory, under the Morrison house. It's still there, you know. Even after they tore the house down, the basement is still there. My father was a psychologist. He studied memory, how to create false memories, how to make people forget things that really happened." My blood went cold. "Tommy, did you take Sarah to the basement?" "She belongs there. She's been having the dreams, hasn't she? The dreams about the basement? That's because she was there before, when we were kids. My father was experimenting on her, trying to see if he could implant false memories and then make her forget the real ones." I was trying to process what Tommy was telling me. "You're saying your father experimented on Sarah when she was a child?" "On several neighborhood children. But Sarah was special. She was the only one who started remembering. That's why we had to leave so suddenly. My father was afraid she'd tell someone." Rodriguez had backup on the way, but I needed to know where Sarah was right now. "Tommy, is Sarah alive?" "She's alive, but she's confused. She's been remembering things that my father made her forget. I've been helping her remember everything. She needs to remember so she can understand why she belongs with me." We arrested Tommy Morrison on the spot, but getting him to tell us exactly where Sarah was took 3 hours of interrogation. Finally, he drew us a map. The old basement of the Morrison house was accessible through a hidden entrance in the new house's backyard. The new owners had no idea it existed. We found Sarah Chen in that basement. She was alive, but barely. Tommy had been keeping her there for 6 days, not 3, like we'd initially thought. She was dehydrated, terrified, and suffering from what appeared to be some kind of psychological break. She kept talking about memories that didn't make sense, memories of being in this basement as a child. The medical team got Sarah to the hospital, and I spent the next week trying to piece together what had really happened all those years ago. I reached out to Dr. Harold Morrison, Tommy's father. Turns out he was living in a psychiatric facility in California, diagnosed with severe dementia. But his old research notes were still in storage at the university where he'd worked. What I found in those notes was disturbing beyond anything I'd encountered in my career. Dr. Morrison had been conducting illegal experiments on children in his basement laboratory, trying to implant false memories and then erase them. He'd been using neighborhood children as test subjects, including Sarah Chen. Sarah had been subjected to these experiments for months when she was 16. Dr. Morrison had been implanting traumatic false memories and then attempting to erase them, studying how the brain processed and stored traumatic experiences. The experiments had been stopped when Sarah began to retain fragmented memories despite the erasure attempts. But here's the truly disturbing part. Tommy Morrison had been helping his father with these experiments. As a teenager, Tommy had been responsible for bringing the children to the basement, gaining their trust, and then helping restrain them during the procedures. Sarah's recent dreams about the basement hadn't been dreams at all. They were recovered memories surfacing after years of being suppressed. The psychological trauma had been so severe that her mind had buried these memories completely. But something had triggered their return. During Sarah's recovery, working with specialized therapists who dealt with recovered memory cases, we learned that she'd been experiencing flashbacks for months. The smell of damp concrete, the sound of dripping water, the feeling of being trapped in a small space. These weren't dreams or imagination. They were her mind trying to process experiences that had been forcibly erased. Tommy Morrison was convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. But during his trial, we uncovered evidence of at least 6 other children who had been subjected to his father's experiments. Most of them had no memory of what had happened to them, but when we reached out to them, several began experiencing similar recovered memories. Dr. Morrison died in the psychiatric facility before he could be charged with anything. His research notes were turned over to the FBI, who discovered that his experiments had been funded by a government contract that was supposed to be studying memory formation in trauma patients. Instead, he'd been conducting illegal human experimentation on children. The case changed everything about how I approached missing person investigations. I learned that sometimes people disappear not because they choose to, but because someone from their past comes back to claim them. I learned that the mind can bury traumatic memories so deeply that they feel like dreams when they surface. And I learned that evil can hide in plain sight for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Sarah Chen recovered physically, but the psychological impact of remembering her childhood trauma while simultaneously experiencing new trauma was devastating. She moved across the country, changed her name, and last I heard, she was working with therapists who specialize in recovered memory cases. The basement where she was held was filled with concrete and sealed permanently. The new homeowners moved out immediately after learning what had happened on their property. The house was eventually demolished, and the lot remains empty to this day. I retired from the Chicago Police Department 12 years ago, but I still get calls from detectives working missing person cases. Sometimes they describe situations that remind me of Sarah's case, a missing person who left behind all their belongings, strange dreams or flashbacks mentioned by family members, a feeling that the disappearance is connected to something from the past. I always tell them the same thing. Dig deeper into the victim's childhood. Look for patterns. Look for people who might have had access to the victim when they were young and vulnerable. Because predators don't always strike immediately. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they watch and wait, for years, even decades, before they make their move. The Morrison case taught me that the past never really stays buried. Trauma has a way of surfacing, even when the mind tries to protect itself by forgetting. And sometimes, the very act of remembering makes you vulnerable to the person who caused the trauma in the first place. I think about Sarah Chen often. I wonder if she's found peace, if she's been able to integrate her recovered memories in a way that allows her to move forward. I hope she has. But I also know that some cases stay with you forever, not because of what happened, but because of what they reveal about the capacity for human evil and the resilience of the human spirit. If you're watching this and you've experienced recovered memories, or if you're supporting someone who has, please know that you're not alone. These memories are real, even if they feel like dreams. And there are people trained to help you process them safely. The mind has an incredible ability to protect itself, but it also has an incredible ability to heal. Sarah Chen survived not just 6 days in that basement, but months of childhood trauma that her mind had hidden from her for over a decade. Her strength in recovering from both experiences is something I'll never forget. This case reminded me why I became a detective in the first place. Not just to solve crimes, but to give voice to victims who can't speak for themselves. Sometimes that means finding people who are missing. Sometimes it means helping people recover memories they didn't know they'd lost. And sometimes it means making sure that people like Tommy Morrison and his father never get the chance to hurt anyone else again.